This needed to be a separate film from the last one. The last one was all about Austin and Austin lights and things, but now this one is back onto the Riley here. And this morning I had a few deliveries turn up. So these are my new reshaped leaf springs with new top leaves for the rear. Hopefully there are some U-bolts in there. I'm not sure. I haven't unwrapped them yet, obviously, so I can't see them. But literally a minute or so after the courier went down the driveway after dropping these off, the second courier turned up with all of my parts, well, not all of them yet, but most of my parts from the UK. So there's still one package to come. The tracking, it looks like it was one shipment, but it was 3 boxes, and one of the boxes got held up in Australia. I don't know if it went on a different flight or something, I guess. But the first 2 off that consignment have turned up today. I'm assuming that's the new crankshaft and rods, because it's built by Arrow. And in here are obviously the new rear half shafts. One thing I think I may have to mention to the guys in the UK is when they're shipping this stuff out to New Zealand, it really has to be very, very well packed, because obviously this has started coming out of the box, and that corner as well. I've had other parts from the Riley spares where by the time it got here the box was practically falling apart and things had dropped out and were lost. So I may mention that to them. These packages ended up going from the UK to the States to Honolulu, then to Australia, then to New Zealand. So it's a fairly roundabout sort of way to get here. So I guess I need to start unwrapping this stuff and see what we've got. Oh, it's very windy outside at the moment. I've unpacked all of this stuff, and I'm still waiting for one package, which actually has quite a bit of stuff in it still. Hopefully that'll arrive possibly tomorrow, if these arrive today. But I was correct, in the first box was the new crankshaft and the new rods. This is one of the rods there. These use modern shell bearings. That's what's in here. Apparently these are from some kind of Ford engine, a Z-Tech engine, I think, because they're very common and easy to get. It also came with a bunch of instructions and inspection reports. I'm not sure what's in there yet. I'll have to have a look in there later. But as well as the crank and the rods, I'm not sure if it actually came with bolts. Oh yes, well the bolts are on the end of the big ends here. These are all ARP bolts apparently. So it comes with the right sort of assembly lube and some very complicated looking instructions on how to get these to the correct torque. I'll have to read through this and figure out what all that means. I may need to actually get some help doing that. I'm not sure I've got the right tools, because it talks about stretch gauging and I don't really understand or know what that means, so I'm going to have to find out about that, because obviously we want to install this thing properly. In the other box were the new rear half shafts. Not much to say about them. They basically go inside the axle. In the shipment that's still coming, there is a good differential, a new crown wheel and pinion, all of the bearings to go in the rear axle and the torque tube, brakes, and all the shock absorbers and the mountings for those. And in the first package that arrived were the reset springs. So these have had leaves removed and they've obviously been flattened. Looking at them, the rears look good. The fronts are a lot softer than I expected. So I'm not sure that these are going to sit right when all the weight of the car is in there. But there's really no way of telling until I actually assemble it all and it's got all the correct weight sitting in there. They will be more flexible just sitting still by themselves like this, because you have to think when this is all clamped down, they're actually clamped here, so this bit doesn't bend. But these look pretty good now. That's all the the old bits and pieces and the old top leaves and things that they removed. So because the springs weren't a match set on the rear, they had to remake these top leaves for me. And you can see how on the Riley spring one axle eye goes down and the other one goes up. They also replaced all the bushes for me, and the spring maker, even he was surprised at how expensive that was. I think each bush ended up being about $30 each, so not cheap. I'm not sure exactly how much the springs have cost me yet because I haven't got the bill for that. But they also provided me with the correct U-bolts, which hopefully fit in there. Yep. So with the front springs and the U-bolts, I can actually now get the front suspension on the car. I have all the shackles and things for that, obviously. I'm not sure if these bushes have been reamed out or if they'll need reaming out, but I've got it's a 1/2-inch reamer for those. I have the mounting plates that go underneath the spring for the shock to mount to. So I may look at doing that soon. And now that I have the crank, I have to look at getting the bearings in the block. The rear one, which is this one, will need to be opened out, and both the front and rear will need to be re-white metalled and then line bored so that this fits. And the taper here on the back, yeah, these are all sticky. I need to get the flywheel machined again, second time, to match this new taper. So I'll have to take it to an engineer to do that. But that all looks really nice. So with all my lovely new parts arriving today, of course I had to rush out into the garage after work to actually start doing stuff on the car. So the first thing I started looking at was the springs. So these have been flattened and had leaves removed, and they've actually made new top leaves for them, for the fronts and the rears for me, so that they're all the same thickness. And one of the issues I came across is these springs, of course, were all built to imperial measurements, and I believe now it's very difficult for them to get the imperial width spring steel, the steel they use for these springs. So I believe the steel top leaf is actually a metric size. It worked out to be about 46 millimeters, which is a couple of millimeters wider than the 1.75 inch that it needs to be. So I ended up having to carefully, starting with the flap wheel on the grinder, I had to thin down the top leaf so that it would fit the shackles. These are the shackles here, and also so that the U-bolts would fit over the leaves there. It only needed a couple of millimeters, but to make sure everything stayed square and parallel, I took the bulk of it off with the flap wheel, and then I used a file, and I actually hand filed it, just to make sure everything was completely flat and the sides are all completely parallel, because the springs just rest in the shackles here. There's not really any thrust washers or anything like that on the sides of this. They just sort of rub together. So I wanted everything to be a really nice fit, so I effectively hand fitted them. The other thing I did is you can see here how I've thinned out that leaf, and I've sort of done it smoothly. I didn't just cut notches out of it because you don't want any sort of stress points, so it's just gently tapered in to be thin enough. The spring maker said it was fine to do that. He said, yeah, you'll probably have to hand fit them a little bit like that. The other thing is these springs have a pin through the middle here, and on the original springs and on the ones that came back, this was a 6mm bolt, which obviously isn't correct for a pre-war car. It should really be a 1/4 inch. And if you look on the axle, where the spring sits, there are these holes, and these were both fairly flogged out. So the bolts that were through there had the heads turned down so that they were round like this. And I believe what's supposed to happen is this is the bracket that the shock absorber bolts to. That sits on there. So if you imagine that sits on the bottom of the spring like that. And this protrudes through to fit into this hole in the axle, and that locates the axle on the spring as well as the U-bolts. These were fairly flogged out, so I ended up drilling them out one size over. I can't remember what the size is in Imperial. And then I made up new bolts to go through the middle. And these were actually made with leftover high tensile studs from my Austin 7. And all I did was I actually put 3 nuts on the end and TIG welded them in place. And then machined it all down on the lathe so that this diameter here is a perfect fit into this hole. So that should all be well located now. So if that goes in there, you can see that all fits in there. It's nice and tight. Once the U-bolts go on there, it'll be all locked solid. One other thing I did notice about these U-bolts is right near the top, you can sort of see where they've been formed, and it's a little bit thinner just in that top corner, so I'm not sure how well these are going to seat fully down on the springs. I suspect when everything's tightened up, they'll just pull tight and everything will just lock into place. But the U-bolts will go through there and then be bolted on the bottom, of course. So when my next package arrives, which should be all the shock absorbers and the mounting pins and things, I'm guessing there's a pin that's going to go on here, and that shock, which is a Hartford type shock, so sort of a circular thing with two lever arms, will go, sort of sits in here, and the lower arm bolts onto that, and the upper arm bolts into the chassis somewhere up here. I can't remember if it needs a new hole drilled or if you actually reuse one of these crossmember bolts through here. So hopefully that'll all make sense when it arrives. I did also have to run a 1/2-inch reamer through the chassis rails because that had never been done, obviously, and there was paint and everything in there. I didn't have to ream out the bushes for the springs, that they were all the right size. I just had to remove any paint that was inside there. The other small job I will do is, these are also metric bolts, which isn't really correct. They should be 1/4 inch BSF probably. And I believe there should be little spacer tubes in here. So I will probably machine something up and get better bolts to go in here. I think on the sides here they're actually countersunk. So maybe I can machine the bolts to fit in there a little bit better. Just a minor detail. The other thing to note about these springs is they're not actually equal lengths. They're slightly shorter on the front than the back. And I imagine if you got that round the wrong way, your axle would be in slightly the wrong position. So I think it's fairly important to get that the right way around, which is why I've got these marked so I know how they go. And you can tell they're handed because the way these little clips are that go through the springs, the countersink is on the outside. They're not symmetrical. So that front axle is now pretty much ready to bolt into the car, I think. Everything is obviously just done up loosely at the moment because it's all going to have to be put together and taken apart multiple times. And I haven't even started looking at the rear springs yet. But another thing I'm going to do is, the paint job on these was pretty rough. I'm guessing these guys are usually doing springs for commercial vehicles and things like that, so a quick blast of black paint and that's called done. I'll probably clean these up and I'll repaint them with the same duplicolor engine enamel that I've used on the axle and all the other suspension components. I need to touch this up as well because I've dropped this a few times and it's been scratched and dinged, and the good thing with using the rattle can paint is you can just touch it all up, and I could even pretty much assemble this as a complete unit, bolt it all together and then spray it all. But I'll probably just spray these separately, and then everything will just look nice and clean. I've actually been away for a few days, and of course the day I went away, my final box of Riley parts arrived, so this has been sitting waiting for me for the last 2 or 3 days. Um, Obviously I've got it now, I've opened it, but I haven't unpacked it, which I'm not really going to do on camera because it's just too awkward. So I'm going to open this one up, take out all the bits and lay them out and see what I've got. After unpacking it all, this is what I have. When you see all the parts and going with the parts that I got before, and you look at the price, it doesn't seem like you get a lot for the amount you spend. But this is all essential stuff, and some of the stuff there's no other way I can get it. So, for example, the shock absorbers, unless I bought those new, I have no idea where I would find those secondhand in New Zealand. I've never ever seen anything like that come up on Trade Me or in the car club magazines. So it's just easier to buy that stuff new. Similar with the diff. This is a good second-hand one. Maybe I could find one here in New Zealand if I looked around enough, but because they had it over there in the UK and I was getting all the stuff sent over anyway, it made sense just to get it when I got everything else. But what we have here are obviously the front and rear shocks. You can either go for steel or alloy armed ones, and I went for the alloy ones just because they're going to be a bit lighter and they weren't that much more expensive. These are the rear oil seals. So rear axle, rear hub, the sort of keeper plate things, and a modern oil seal, which hopefully stops any oil getting down the half shafts onto the brakes. I got a set of brake shoes for the whole car. These look like they're different materials, so I don't know if one's supposed to go on the front and one's supposed to go on the back, or if it doesn't matter. Obviously you'd make sure it was even. You know, you'd put all of one sort on the front and all of one sort on the back, whichever way around they go. You wouldn't mix them up, unless one's meant to be trailing and one's supposed to be a leading shoe. I'm not sure. I'll have to ask and figure that one out. These are actually done on a sort of exchange basis, but I was actually able to buy them outright because I have half a set of brake shoes. I don't have the 8 of them that I need for the whole car. I had 4 of them, so theoretically I could have sent those over on an exchange basis, but by the time I'd done that, it would have cost me more in postage to send them over to the UK than just paying the charge for getting these outright. I think it was about £20 per shoe for the core charge, and then extra for the riveting and the lining and stuff. The shock absorbers have special mounting pins. That's what all these are. These ones are part machined pins, and I'm not sure exactly what I need to do with these yet. I need to check with my contacts in the UK how this all works. These are the special nuts that you need to bolt the shocks onto the pins. They're sort of cone type nuts, so I guess they hold everything centralized. I got, as well as the second-hand differential, I got a new crown wheel and pinion because the ones I had just weren't serviceable at all with big chips out of them. And I think this is probably somewhere where if you're restoring an old car, it's probably worth spending the money on these, the crown wheel and pinion, if what you've got is not very good, or you know it's not necessarily in really great condition. And these always go together as a pair, so you can't just get a new pinion gear on an old crown wheel. That just wouldn't make any sense. And often these things are sort of match pairs, which is why on an older car you can have problems if somebody's tried to mix and match old parts to get something that works. I don't actually know what happens if you've got a badly put together differential, apart from the fact it'll wear more and it'll be noisy, which is annoying, because it is annoying when they're noisy. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the story is there, but these were available, they're new, and they're the correct ratio for a Brooklands, so I just went ahead and got those. And I also got a complete bearing set for the rear axle and the torque tube, I think. I'm not sure if it includes the torque tube bearings. These, again, I might have been able to source these locally, bearings get a bit funny, especially with some of these weirder sizes. And apparently there are people in New Zealand who can find these things for me. But it was just easier again to buy a whole kit of parts. And maybe I could save $100 or so, a couple of $100 New Zealand. But doing it this way, I get everything I need and I know I've got it. Because I figure what would happen if I tried to source these locally is maybe I could get 8 out of the 10 or whatever it is in there that I need. 2 of them would be impossible to get locally and I'd have to get them from the UK anyway. And the postage on those would probably be £50. So I don't know if I'd really save anything. So that should be everything I need for the rear axle now. Theoretically, I can test this. These are my new half shafts. And you can see there's a big spline on the end there. That should, oh, it's quite heavy, fit in there. There we go. So that's how the half shafts fit in there. Oh, of course, now it's stuck. These don't come with the studs, so I have on order from the Riley Spares in the UK a whole new set of studs for the car, which again aren't at all cheap, but you need new studs and you need new nuts to go with them, and they're all special studs and nuts, and they're handed on the car, so on one side of the car they're opposite threaded. But I think that's it. With all that now, and especially with the crank, I need to now look at the block modifications that need to be done and the new white metal bearing mods for the new crank. But I'll ring the chap who does that during the week. He's really busy. Apparently he's got a waiting list into the middle of next year, but I mentioned what I was doing and he said, oh, that's not a big job. I should be able to fit that in for you if you let me know what you need doing. So I need to get on to that during the week. And the other thing I've done is I finished modifying the springs. I think I mentioned in the last film, or probably even in this one, it's been a few days, so I can't remember what I've talked about before. I did have to grind down the top leaf on the springs because, being modern steel, this isn't exact metric size. So it's a little bit fatter. And so I carefully wasted it down in the middle to get it to fit. And this is all together fairly loosely now, you can see. I haven't bothered to tighten everything up because I think once I tighten this all up, it'd be a real pain to get it apart again. And also I've only got the nylock nuts that go on the bottom here. And these, I don't want to use them until I need to use them properly. I still want to put in the little spacer tubes that go in here, and I'll repaint these springs just so they're not glossy. They get them to match the rest of the undercarriage, which is this kind of semi-gloss black. So that's coming together as well. I still have a few more parts I'll need to get from the UK, including the drag link that goes from the steering arm, which I have, to the front axle here. My wheels, I'm just waiting for the tyres to come from the UK. So the people who rebuilt the wheels for me also import tyres, so I'm getting a set of tyres through them, and they will also fit them to the rims for me and balance them. I just have to wait. I'm not sure when their next shipment is coming through. They bring in containers of stuff. It may not be till the end of October, so the wheels are probably a little way away. But at least I know the spoked parts and the wheels are done, and the rest will be coming, and it'll all just arrive ready to bolt on. I think that's more or less it for now, on the Riley, that is. So what I do need to decide is, I have 2 axle casings here, and you can probably see what the difference is between these two. This is an original steel one. This is one that's been cast out of aluminium, and it should be a lot lighter. And I think I did measure these. I've got 7 kg written on there. I can't remember if that's the weight of the thing, which, no, it seems heavier than that, or if that's how much lighter it is than the steel one. So you can see it's been beefed up in some places, like this. This flange is a lot thicker. So I need to decide which one I'm actually going to use. I would be worried maybe that the alloy one, because of the way the rear saddles on the spring work, which is steel, I wonder if it would wear into there or not, into the aluminium. So that'll be interesting, just figuring out which axle casing is going to be better to use. The main reason you would do that is for weight saving. So the whole Brooklands, it's not a hugely heavy car. I think it's about 800 kilograms on the road. But then again, it's not hugely powerful. So any weight you can save is going to help. So that's why they always make race cars as light as possible. And the other thing I'm wondering about is if these front springs are going to be strong enough, because off the car they seem quite soft. I won't really know till I've got everything assembled and all the weight on it. And these may need adjusting again. But what I could do is, instead of having to send them away to the spring maker, if I do need to change anything, I may just be able to put another leaf in the top here, because this has already had leaves removed, so there is space here for a top leaf. And that is actually how the original Brooklands springs appear to be from the photographs. If you look at the photos of them, there is actually a top leaf on here which doesn't have eyes on it. So that's always something I could look at doing. But next thing, as I mentioned, start sorting out the good engine, which is over there, and start looking at the rear axle, and of course I still have to figure out how the rear springs mount, which is fairly important. So still lots to do, but with all this lot now, I can definitely start making more progress. Just been out to drop the MGB off for its warrant of fitness. About 4 or 5 months late because of the whole COVID thing. People couldn't get out, so they extended the warrants 6 months until October. And I have to get a warrant on that every 6 months because it's an old car, apparently, even though I do very low mileage on it. So I waited as long as I could before going and getting a warrant on it, just to make the most of the free extra time, I guess. So that's off getting its warrant now, just around the corner. Usually doesn't take too long. And when I got home, there was another package for me, or another 3 packages actually, because it was split up because it was all too heavy to go into one. And so these are some of the other parts I was waiting for, which is a complete set of wheel studs and nuts. So you can see how these are handed. So this is a left-hand thread wheel nut. A little bit tricky with one hand, but you can see that on this side of the car, on the near side of the car, they're reverse thread to do them up. And then you've got the right-hand side ones. The chap who was rebuilding my wheels for me, he said, yeah, you should probably replace all the studs and things. They get worn out. Apparently that's reasonably common on these cars. I mean, especially when they're original and it's all 90 years old and 90 years of wheels going on and off. So I figured it was worth spending the money to get these. It's kind of interesting. You can see why they're so expensive, because there's quite a bit of work in these and a bit of machining. It's got a little pin in there, a little stud thing. These get kind of pinged over. I'm guessing I have to press these into the half shafts. So these will fit through there, I imagine. You take that off. I'm guessing those have to be pressed in and then the nut done up, and usually there's a couple of sort of punch marks, dimple marks on the back to stop the nut coming undone. I'll probably use Loctite on them as well. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to press those in on my little press there, or if I'll have to get somebody to do that for me. But even if I do, that's probably not a very big job for someone with the right equipment. So let me just put that on there so I don't lose it. I think it's only the wheel nuts that are reverse thread. So you can see that one's just standard thread, because those get done up and done up tight, and then they're never supposed to come undone again. So I also got a new set of tappets, which compared to the old ones, I'm glad I did now. These are very nice. Again, you can see they're really beautifully machined. The reason I wanted to replace these straight away is because these go inside the engine. So the top of the rocker gear you can get to pretty easily. You take the rocker boxes off and that's your rocker gear basically. So you can replace all of that later on. But these go inside the engine, and it would mean stripping the engine down to get to them. So when I build up the engine, I want to build up the short block once and have it all nice and correct. These other parts are to do with the crank. So this is the vintage style intermediate gear, crank pinion gear rather, which meshes with the intermediate gear, which then drives the camshaft gears. And this is the special pinion nut that goes on the end of the crank to hold all that in place. Because mine is a Mark V engine and this is earlier stuff, they don't actually make the right components for the Mark V, but I have instructions on how you machine this down, you modify it so it'll all fit and everything will work. I also got a new flywheel nut. This is a thrust washer for the crank, and new tab washers and things for it all as well. So with that and all the other parts I got yesterday and the parts from the week before for the suspension and the springs and so on, maybe I should now be able to start progressing things a lot faster.